The weight of broken promises. The warm scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as Elena sat at her desk, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She had spent the past few months carefully planning her next step, applying for graduate school, securing a stable future. Everything was set in motion, just as her parents had always promised. "We've been saving for you since the day you were born, Elena. You'll never have to worry about money for school," her father had said proudly on the night of her high school graduation. Those words had comforted her, made her believe that, no matter what happened, she had a safety net. But today, as she sat in the dimly lit office of the local bank, reality came crashing down. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter," the bank teller said, her voice gentle but firm. "The account has been closed for over a year. There's nothing left." Elena's breath hitched. "That's impossible," she whispered, gripping the edge of the desk as though it could anchor her in the moment. The teller hesitated before sliding a printout across the counter. "The withdrawals were made by your parents. The final transaction drained the account completely." The words barely registered. The neatly printed numbers blurred in front of her eyes as her heart pounded wildly in her chest. Gone. The money that was supposed to secure her future. Money she had never touched, never even questioned, had vanished without her knowledge. The walls of the bank seemed to close in around her. Betrayal coiled in her stomach, making her lightheaded. She stumbled backward, barely hearing the teller's soft reassurances. The betrayal was louder than anything else. Her parents had lied to her. The confrontation. She barely remembered the drive home. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The familiar streets blurred past as her mind replayed the moment over and over. Had it been a mistake? A misunderstanding? But deep down, she already knew the truth. The moment she stormed through the front door, she found her mother sitting at the kitchen table, sipping tea as though nothing had happened. Her father stood by the window, watching the sunset, utterly at ease. "How could you?" Her voice trembled, raw with disbelief. Her mother didn't flinch. She calmly set her cup down and glanced up at Elena with mild irritation. "Elena, don't start." Her father finally turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Start what?" Elena's voice rose, anger boiling beneath her skin. "I just came from the bank. My savings, the money for my education, it's gone. You took it." Her parents exchanged a look. A silent conversation passed between them, as though they had been expecting this moment. "We needed it," her father said simply. Elena's chest tightened. "Needed it for what?" Her mother exhaled, looking utterly unbothered. "Your brother was struggling. We helped him buy a house." The words hit like a slap. "Jason?" Elena choked out. "You drained my entire savings for Jason?" Jason, her older brother, the one who had flunked out of college twice, bounced between jobs, and never seemed to take responsibility for anything. Her father's expression hardened. "Your brother needed stability. He's been through a lot." Elena's pulse pounded in her ears. "And what about me? What about the future you promised me?" Her mother sighed, standing up from the table as though bored with the conversation. "You've always been independent. You'll figure something out. You don't need that money as much as he does." Elena's breath came in short, sharp bursts. "That money was mine. You told me it was for my future. I worked hard because I believed I had something to rely on." Her father's voice turned cold. "Life isn't always fair, Elena. You can't expect everything to be handed to you." The words were a knife to the gut. Handed to me? She had never asked for handouts. She had worked tirelessly, excelled in school, followed every rule they had laid out, and now, when she needed them most, they were treating her as though she were the selfish one. Betrayal burned in her veins. Every childhood memory of feeling second best, every moment where Jason had been given chance after chance while she was expected to be self-sufficient, suddenly made perfect sense. She had never been their priority, she had just been their backup plan. A shattered illusion. Elena's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "So that's it? You steal my future, and I'm just supposed to accept it?" Her mother rolled her eyes. "Honestly, Elena, you're being dramatic. One setback isn't the end of the world. You always land on your feet." The casual dismissal shattered something deep inside her. Every sacrifice she had made to meet their expectations, every night spent studying instead of going out with friends, every dream she had carefully constructed around their promises, It had all been built on a foundation of lies. Her voice steadied, quiet but filled with raw, unshakable resolve. You used me, lied to me, and you don't even care. Her father turned away, staring out the window as though the conversation no longer interested him. Grow up, Elena. This is real life. Not everything is about you. Elena felt something inside her shift. The last piece of naive trust she had clung to crumbled. They would never see her pain. They would never apologize. Because to them, she was just a resource to be used when needed. But they had underestimated her. They thought she would swallow this betrayal the same way she had swallowed every unfair moment before it. They thought she would stay quiet. They were wrong. The beginning of a new fight. As she turned to leave, tears burned at the edges of her vision, but they weren't just from sadness. They were from rage, from the fire of realization that she would never let them control her again. As she stepped outside, the cold air stung her skin, grounding her in a new, undeniable truth. She would rebuild, not because of them, but in spite of them. And one day, they would realize the weight of what they had lost. Not the money, not the savings, but her. The truth behind the shadows. The rain drummed softly against the car window as Melissa sat in the parking lot, staring at her phone. She had tried calling 3 times already, but there was no answer. Her parents always picked up. Always. A part of her knew she should stop, should just drive home and let it go. But the gnawing ache in her chest wouldn't let her. The money was gone. Everything she had spent years believing in. Her security, her safety, the promise of a future free from financial struggles, had been a lie. And there was only one person who could give her answers. With a deep breath, she turned the key in the ignition and pulled out of the parking lot, her mind racing faster than the raindrops streaking across her windshield. Uncovering the past. The house loomed ahead, dark and still. It was the same house she had grown up in, filled with childhood laughter, holiday traditions, and the echo of bedtime stories. But tonight, it felt unfamiliar. Cold. Melissa stepped onto the porch and knocked, ignoring the churning unease in her stomach. A moment later, the door swung open, revealing her mother standing in her silk robe, a glass of wine in hand. "Melissa," she said smoothly, arching an eyebrow. "What are you doing here so late?" Melissa's eyes flickered past her, catching a glimpse of her father lounging on the couch, flipping through television channels as if nothing had changed. "Where's my money?" she asked, her voice steady but barely concealing the fury beneath. Her mother sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "Melissa, not this again." Her father didn't even look up. "You promised me?" Melissa pressed, stepping inside. "You always told me that my savings were safe, that I'd have something to fall back on. And now—" She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Now, it's just gone?" Her mother's lips pursed. "We used it for something more important." Melissa's stomach twisted. "More important than my future?" A long silence stretched between them before her father finally spoke. "Your brother needed help." Melissa froze. She turned to face her father, whose gaze remained fixed on the TV. "Daniel?" she asked, almost not believing it. Her mother took another sip of wine. "He was in trouble, Melissa. You know how hard things have been for him." Melissa knew. She knew all too well. Daniel had always been reckless, always finding himself in some kind of trouble, always expecting someone else to fix it. And someone always did. Her parents. And now, her. "You gave Daniel my money?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "He needed it more," her father replied flatly. Melissa let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head. "So that's it? You just decided I don't matter? That my hard work, my future, none of it was as important as bailing out Daniel again?" Her mother set her glass down, looking almost bored. "Don't be dramatic, Melissa. You're strong. You always land on your feet." A lump formed in Melissa's throat. She had heard that phrase before, so many times. Whenever Daniel crashed their parents' car and blamed it on bad luck. Whenever he lost another job and moved back home. Whenever he failed to take responsibility, and Melissa was left to clean up the mess. "You're strong, Melissa. You'll figure it out." Her hands clenched at her sides. "You always do this," she whispered. "You've always done this. You give him everything. And you expect me to just be okay with it." Her father let out a sigh, finally turning to look at her. "Melissa, enough. It's done. There's nothing you can do about it now." A sharp pain lanced through her chest, not because of the money, but because of how little they cared. How easily they dismissed her. Like she was nothing more than an afterthought. A lifetime of being overlooked. Melissa's mind raced back through years of buried memories. Birthdays where Daniel got expensive gifts while she got whatever was practical. Graduations where his minor achievements were praised while hers were brushed aside. Every moment where she had to earn their love while Daniel received it without question. And she had let it happen. For years she had convinced herself that if she worked hard enough, if she proved herself enough, she would finally be seen. But she never was. And now, she never would be. Her mother tilted her head as if growing impatient. "Melissa, you're acting like we stole from you. That money was in a family account. It wasn't just yours." Melissa let out a bitter laugh. "I worked for it, I saved it, I sacrificed for it. But sure, tell yourself it wasn't mine." Her father stood, brushing past her toward the kitchen. "You're being selfish. Daniel's been struggling. He deserved a second chance." "And how many more chances does he get?" Melissa snapped, her voice finally breaking. "How many more times do you save him at my expense?" Neither of them had an answer. Because they didn't need one. They had already decided she didn't matter. Melissa felt something deep inside her crack. Something she'd been holding on to for far too long. The hope that one day she would be enough. That one day they would treat her like she mattered. But that day was never coming. The breaking point. Melissa straightened, her heart pounding in her chest. "You know what?" she said, her voice eerily calm. "I'm done." Her mother frowned. "Melissa, don't be ridiculous." But Melissa just shook her head. "No, I have spent my entire life putting this family first, trying to be the daughter you wanted, trying to be good enough, and for what?" She exhaled, the weight on her chest lifting. "I'm done being the backup plan." Her father scoffed, but there was something new in his eyes, a flicker of unease. Because they had never seen her like this before. They had never thought she would walk away. Her mother folded her arms. "You think you can just cut us off?" Melissa smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Watch me." And with that she turned, stepping back into the rain. Her mother called after her, her voice sharp with disbelief. But Melissa didn't stop, didn't look back. For the first time in her life, she wasn't waiting for their approval. She wasn't trying to be enough for people who had never valued her. She was walking away. And it felt like freedom. The moment of clarity. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the neighborhood as Callie parked her car in front of her uncle's house. She sat in silence, gripping the steering wheel, her mind still reeling from the past few days. The betrayal sat heavy in her chest, suffocating, unshakable. Her parents had drained her savings, money she had trusted them to safeguard, without so much as a warning. And for what? For her sister. For Bianca. Callie clenched her jaw, pushing back the frustration that had been simmering inside her since she left her childhood home earlier that afternoon. She had confronted them, demanded answers, only to be met with cold indifference. Bianca needed it more, her mother had said, voice clipped and dismissive. Her father hadn't even tried to justify it. They had made their choice. And for the first time in her life, Callie was making hers. She grabbed her purse, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. The only one who ever noticed, the door creaked open before Callie could knock. Uncle Victor stood in the entryway, his sharp blue eyes scanning her face. He had always been the quiet one in the family, the observer, the only person who ever seemed to notice when something was wrong. "You look like you've been through hell," he said, stepping aside to let her in. Callie let out a breathy laugh, though there was no humor in it. "That obvious?" Victor nodded toward the living room. "Come inside. Tell me what happened." The warmth of the house was a stark contrast to the chill Callie felt inside. The familiar scent of old books and coffee wrapped around her like a comfort she hadn't realized she needed. She sank onto the couch, resting her elbows on her knees. "I went to the bank today," she started, her voice quieter than she intended. "My savings account is empty." Victor's brow furrowed, but he didn't interrupt. "They took everything," Callie continued, staring at the floor. "Mom and Dad? They drained the account months ago to help Bianca buy a condo." Victor exhaled sharply. "Jesus." Callie let out a bitter laugh. "That's what I said." He leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "Did they even apologize?" Callie shook her head. "No, they acted like it was normal, like I was overreacting for being upset. She swallowed past the lump in her throat. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. They've always put Bianca first. Victor's silence spoke volumes. He had noticed, too. For years, Callie had convinced herself she was imagining it, that the difference in how they treated her versus Bianca wasn't as bad as it seemed. But now, there was no denying it. Every childhood memory suddenly carried a different weight. The birthdays where Bianca got elaborate parties while Callie got a store-bought cake. The holidays where Bianca's wish list was checked off while Callie was told to be grateful for what she had. The quiet moments when Callie achieved something significant, only for it to be overshadowed by Bianca's latest struggle. It had always been this way. Callie had just never let herself see it. The last straw. Victor rubbed a hand over his face, sighing deeply. I wish I could say I'm surprised, kid, but I'm not. Callie's chest tightened. You knew? I had my suspicions. He admitted. I've watched them favor Bianca for years. I called them out on it once, but they brushed me off. Said I was making things up. The anger that had been simmering inside Callie flared into something hotter, sharper. So they really think this is okay. Victor met her gaze, something unreadable in his expression. What are you going to do about it? Callie hesitated. She had spent years trying to be the perfect daughter. The one who didn't complain, who didn't cause trouble, who didn't make waves. But where had that gotten her? Used, discarded, forgotten. Her parents had taken everything from her. Not just money, but trust, love, security. And they had done it without a second thought. She wasn't going to let them get away with it. I'm not going to let them win, she said, her voice steady. They think they can take from me and expect me to just move on? They're wrong. Victor nodded approvingly. Good. You deserve better, Callie. Her throat tightened. She wasn't used to hearing that, but for the first time she believed it. A plan for justice. The next few days were a blur of research, late-night planning, and restless energy. Callie wasn't just going to move on. She was going to fight back. After digging through old paperwork and bank statements, she found something she hadn't expected. Her parents hadn't just withdrawn her savings. They had forged her signature. Callie's hands trembled as she stared at the document in front of her. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was fraud. She ran a hand through her hair, exhaling shakily. This changed everything. Her parents had crossed a line they couldn't take back. And now, neither could she. She met with a lawyer the next morning, laying everything out on the table. The financial documents, the forged signature, the fact that the money had been taken without her consent. This is serious, the lawyer said, flipping through the pages. You have a case, Callie. A strong one. Callie swallowed hard. What happens if I move forward? The lawyer leaned forward. If you press charges, they'll be investigated. If found guilty, they could face significant legal consequences. A weight settled in Callie's chest. Her parents had stolen from her. And now she had the power to make them answer for it. She sat in silence for a moment, thinking. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about proving to herself, to them, to everyone, that she wasn't disposable. That she wouldn't be walked over. That she mattered. She met the lawyer's gaze. Do it. The first steps toward freedom. As Callie left the office, the weight on her shoulders felt a little lighter. For years, she had let her parents' favoritism define her worth. She had believed that if she worked hard enough, if she proved herself enough, they would finally see her. But she didn't need their validation anymore. She was reclaiming her life on her own terms. Callie pulled out her phone and scrolled through her recent messages. A text from Bianca sat unopened. Bianca. Hey, Mom and Dad told me you're mad about the money. It's not a big deal. You'll be fine. You always are. Just let it go. Callie stared at the message, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. No apology, no remorse. Just the expectation that she would, as always, roll over and accept it. Not this time. She typed a response. Callie, I hope you enjoy the condo. It might not be yours for much longer. She hit send, turned off her phone and walked away, toward a future that, for the first time, was entirely her own. The reckoning. The air was thick with tension as Naomi sat in the dimly lit restaurant, her fingers drumming against the polished wooden table. She glanced around, noting the lively hum of conversations, the clinking of glasses, the soft glow of candlelight reflecting off the wine bottles lining the walls. Her parents would be here any moment. They thought this was a reconciliation dinner, a peace offering. They had no idea what was coming. She took a slow, measured breath, steadying herself. For months she had wrestled with her anger, her betrayal, her heartbreak. But tonight wasn't about emotions. Tonight was about consequences. The door swung open, and Naomi's father strode in first, his usual air of self-importance radiating from him. Her mother followed closely behind, dressed elegantly as always, a forced smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Naomi," her mother greeted, her tone light, falsely warm. "I'm so glad you agreed to meet." Naomi offered a tight smile. "Of course, we have a lot to discuss." Her father pulled out a chair, sitting down with a sigh. "Now, before we get into all that nonsense about money, I hope you've had time to reflect. We are still your parents, and family should always come first." Naomi clenched her jaw. The audacity. She reached for her glass of water, taking a sip before calmly placing it down. "I couldn't agree more. Family should come first, which is why I was so shocked to find out that my supposed safety net, my savings, was drained without my knowledge." Her mother scoffed lightly, waving a hand dismissively. "We already explained, darling. Your brother needed help." Her brother. The golden child. The one who had failed at everything, yet always landed on his feet, because they made sure of it. Naomi folded her hands on the table, tilting her head. "Right. And it never once occurred to you that maybe I needed that money? That maybe, after working tirelessly for years, I deserved to have what was rightfully mine?" Her father sighed, as if exhausted by her audacity to stand up for herself. "Naomi, don't be dramatic. We knew you'd figure something out. You always do." That was the breaking point. She exhaled slowly, her voice calm but firm. "I did figure something out." She reached into her bag and placed a folder on the table. The mood shifted instantly. Her parents' eyes flickered with the first hints of unease. "What's this?" her father asked, reaching for it. "Proof," Naomi said simply. "Bank statements, legal documents, everything I need to move forward." Her mother stiffened. "Move forward with what?" Naomi met her gaze, unwavering. "Fraud charges." Silence. Her father's expression darkened. "You can't be serious." Naomi leaned forward slightly. "Oh, I'm very serious." Her mother laughed nervously. "Naomi, sweetie, this is absurd. We're family. You wouldn't actually go through with this." "Wouldn't I?" Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Because from where I'm sitting, you stole from me. You forged my signature. You drained an account that was legally mine. That's not just unethical. It's illegal." Her father's nostrils flared. "This is a mistake." Naomi shook her head. "No, Dad. Your mistake was thinking I'd let you get away with it." Her mother's voice wavered. "Naomi, think about what you're doing. This will tear the family apart." Naomi's lips curled into a humorless smile. "You did that already." The weight of her words settled over the table. For years they had used her, taken her silence for obedience, assumed she would always be the responsible one, the understanding one, the forgiving one. They had underestimated her. Her father was the first to break. "Fine, what do you want?" Naomi tapped the folder. "Reparations, full repayment, every cent you took plus interest." Her mother's eyes widened. "That's impossible." "Then I guess we're going to court." The color drained from her father's face. He was a man who thrived on reputation, on appearances. A public scandal would ruin him. And he knew it. He inhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "Naomi, listen. We can figure something out. There's no need for all this." "That's where you're wrong," Naomi said coolly. "There was every need for this. You taught me that." Her mother fumbled for words. "Please, honey, don't do this." Naomi tilted her head. "Did you think about that when you drained my account? Did you pause before signing my name on fraudulent documents? Did you hesitate before deciding that my future wasn't as important as his?" Neither of them spoke. Naomi pushed her chair back and stood, smoothing out her dress. "I'll be expecting the money by the end of the month. If not, my lawyer will be in touch." Her father's jaw clenched. "You think you're so much better than us, don't you?" Naomi met his gaze, unwavering. "No, I just finally know my worth." She grabbed her bag and turned, walking away without looking back. Her parents didn't call after her. They knew they had lost. The aftermath. In the days that followed, Naomi prepared herself for war. Her parents tried every trick in the book. Guilt, manipulation, even distant relatives reaching out to talk sense into her. But she didn't waver. She didn't owe them silence. She didn't owe them forgiveness. By the end of the month, the money was wired into her account. A part of her had expected it. They couldn't afford to have their crimes exposed. Still, when she saw the numbers in her account, her own money returned to her, it felt different. It felt like freedom. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving under the weight of their expectations. She was standing on her own, and she would never let them take that from her again. Breaking the chains. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Sophie sat in her childhood bedroom, staring at the old posters still hanging on the walls. The familiar scent of lavender lingered in the air, but it no longer felt like home. Not after everything that had happened. Her parents had stolen from her. The people who were supposed to protect her, to guide her, had betrayed her in the most calculated way possible. And the worst part? They didn't even think they had done anything wrong. The confrontation had been brutal. She had exposed their lies, their manipulation, their favoritism toward her younger brother Adam. And instead of remorse, all she had received was condescension. "You'll figure something out," her mother had said, dismissively waving a hand. "You've always been the responsible one," her father had added, as if that somehow justified stealing her future. Sophie clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She had spent years sacrificing, working tirelessly, never once asking for help. Meanwhile, Adam had coasted through life with excuse after excuse, always shielded from consequences. And now, she was the one expected to understand. The thought made her stomach turn. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She wasn't going to stay silent. She wasn't going to let them win. Unraveling the truth, days passed in a blur. Sophie buried herself in work, trying to push the betrayal aside, but the ache in her chest refused to fade. Then, one evening, she received a call. Not from her parents, not from Adam, but from an unexpected source. Her Aunt Claire. "Hey, kid." Claire's voice was warm but tinged with something else. Concern. "Can we talk?" Sophie hesitated. Claire had always been the family's outlier, the one who saw things others pretended weren't there. She wasn't close with Sophie's parents, but she had always been kind to her. Taking a deep breath, Sophie agreed. They met at a small coffee shop the next morning. Claire was already waiting, a steaming cup in front of her, her piercing blue eyes studying Sophie carefully. "I heard what happened," she said, without preamble. Sophie let out a dry laugh. "Of course you did. I'm sure everyone's talking about how ungrateful I am." Claire shook her head. "Actually, I've been waiting for this to happen. You were always going to reach this point, Sophie. Your parents don't see you as a person. They see you as a resource." The words hit harder than Sophie expected. Claire sighed, stirring her coffee. "Do you know why I don't come around much anymore?" Sophie shook her head. "Because I went through the same thing," Claire admitted. "Not with money, but with expectations. With being told I needed to sacrifice while someone else got all the benefits. And when I finally fought back, I became the villain in their story." Sophie swallowed hard. "So what did you do?" "I walked away." Claire's expression was calm, but there was strength behind her words. "And it was the best decision I ever made." Sophie's chest tightened. She wanted to believe that was an option for her, but the idea of truly severing ties made her stomach twist. "I don't know if I can do that," she admitted. Claire reached across the table, squeezing Sophie's hand. "You don't have to decide right now, but just know, you don't owe them your silence, or your loyalty, not when it's one-sided." Sophie looked down, staring at the dark liquid in her cup. For the first time, she truly considered what life would be like if she stopped trying to please people who didn't care about her. And it didn't seem as terrifying as it once had. The fallout begins. Sophie hadn't spoken to her parents in weeks when the first message arrived. "Mom, Sophie, we need to talk." "You're overreacting." "Family is more important than money." She ignored it. A day later, another. "Dad, enough of this nonsense. You're embarrassing us. Call your mother back." She deleted the message. Then, Adam's voice message came through. "Soph, this is ridiculous. You're really gonna ruin the family over a little money? Mom and Dad helped me because I needed it. You're fine. You always are. Just let it go." Sophie's grip tightened around her phone. That was the problem. They had convinced themselves that her struggles weren't real, that just because she didn't ask for help, she didn't need it. They had rewritten the narrative to make themselves feel justified. But she wasn't going to let them. Not anymore. the strength to walk away. Sophie wasn't sure when she made the final decision, but one morning, she found herself dialing a number she had been avoiding. Her lawyer. "Let's move forward," she said simply. "They need to be held accountable." And just like that, everything was set into motion. The case would take time. It wouldn't be easy. But Sophie was ready. She had spent her whole life shrinking herself to fit into their version of who she was supposed to be. Now, she was rewriting the story. A week later, she got another call, this time from her father. She almost didn't pick up. But she did. "Sophie," he started, his tone clipped, impatient. "Are you really doing this?" "You did this," she corrected. "I'm just making sure you face the consequences." "You're blowing everything out of proportion," she exhaled. "No, Dad. You did that when you stole from me." A long silence. Then a sharp exhale from the other end. "Fine. If this is what you want, don't bother coming back." Sophie's throat tightened, but she refused to let the words hurt her. She had already lost them a long time ago. "That's your choice," she said simply, "not mine." And then she hung up. For the first time in her life, she felt light, unburdened, free, a future of her own. Making months passed. The case moved forward, and with every step, Sophie felt stronger. Her parents tried to fight back, but the evidence was against them. Eventually they settled. The money was returned. But Sophie knew she had won something much bigger than that. She had reclaimed herself. One evening, as she sat in her new apartment, overlooking the city skyline, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before. Her phone buzzed. A message from Claire. "Claire, proud of you, kid. You finally put yourself first. How does it feel?" Sophie smiled. "Sophie. Like I should have done it years ago." She put the phone down, leaning back against the couch. For the first time, she wasn't looking back. She was looking forward, and this time, the future was hers. A new beginning. The wind carried the scent of fresh rain as Leah stepped onto the porch of her new home. She inhaled deeply, feeling the crisp air fill her lungs. This was it. Her space, her life, her freedom. The weight of the past few months still clung to her shoulders, but it was lighter now, like an old coat she was finally ready to shed. Everything had changed, but more importantly, she had changed. Leah unlocked the door, stepping inside. The house was small but perfect, with its warm wooden floors and sunlit windows. It was the kind of place that didn't just shelter her, it welcomed her. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged. And the best part? She didn't owe it to anyone but herself. Letting go of the past, unpacking was slow, deliberate. Every item she placed on the shelves felt like a quiet declaration of independence. A framed photo of her and her best friend April from their college days. A small potted plant she had managed to keep alive for 3 years. Proof that she could nurture something and watch it grow. A pile of books she had been meaning to read, now finally within reach. Each object carried a memory, but none of them felt heavy. Not like the memories of her family. She hadn't spoken to her parents in weeks. Not since the settlement was finalized. The moment she had signed the last legal document, confirming that the money they had stolen was returned to her, something inside her had settled. She had won. Not just financially, but emotionally. She had broken free from the cycle they had trapped her in for years. The expectation that she would always be the one to sacrifice, to endure, to forgive without question. She had chosen herself, and she wasn't looking back. A familiar name, a different feeling. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, expecting another spam email or delivery notification. Instead, a name she hadn't seen in weeks flashed across the screen. Lam. Leah's stomach tightened, but she didn't feel the usual rush of panic. She let it ring. A minute later, a voicemail appeared. With a deep breath, she pressed play. "Leah." Her mother's voice was quieter than usual, lacking its usual sharp edge. "I don't know what you want me to say. You got what you wanted. I hope you're happy." A pause. "Your father still thinks you'll come around. I don't know." Another sigh. "Take care of yourself." Click. Leah stared at the phone. No apology. No regret. Just guilt. Thinly veiled as concern. It didn't hurt as much as she expected it to. She deleted the message and turned back to her unpacking. Her mother had made her choices, and Leah had made hers. Rebuilding with real love. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Leah heard a knock at the door. She opened it to find April standing there, holding a bottle of wine and a bag of takeout. I figured you could use some company on your first night, April grinned, stepping inside before Leah could protest. Leah laughed, shaking her head. You know me too well. As they settled onto the couch, April popped the wine open, pouring them each a glass. So, she said, raising an eyebrow, how does it feel? Being officially free? Leah took a sip, letting the warmth spread through her. It feels. She paused, searching for the right word. April nudged her. Amazing? Terrifying? Both? Leah smiled. April smirked. Well, for what it's worth, I'm so proud of you. I know how hard this was. Leah exhaled slowly. Yeah, it was. And it had been. Walking away from the people who raised her, standing up for herself, choosing to break free from their control, it had been the hardest thing she had ever done. But it had also been the most important. Because for the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was living. Closure in the smallest moments. The next few weeks passed in a blur of new routines and quiet victories. Leah found a rhythm in her new life. Morning walks with coffee in hand, late nights curled up with a book, weekends spent exploring the city she had never truly seen before. She got a promotion at work. She reconnected with friends she had lost touch with. She even started painting again, something she had abandoned years ago when life had felt too heavy to be creative. Every day was another step toward healing. One afternoon, while shopping for groceries, she ran into her cousin, Mia. Mia hesitated before speaking. Leah, hey. Leah smiled, genuinely surprised. Hey, Mia, how are you? Mia shifted, glancing down. I just wanted to say I heard what happened. And I get it. Leah tilted her head. You do? Mia sighed. Yeah, my parents have always treated your family like they could do no wrong, but I saw it. How they always put Adam first, how they expected you to be the good one, no matter what. Leah's heart clenched, but not in pain. In understanding. Mia offered a small smile. You did what you had to do, and honestly, I think you were brave for it. Leah let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Thank you, she said softly. For the first time, someone from her family acknowledged the truth, and that meant more than she expected. The future unburdened. On a warm Saturday morning, Leah sat on her front porch, watching the sunrise. She sipped her coffee, letting the moment sink in. For the first time in her life, she felt light. There were still things to unpack, both in her house and in her heart. But she had time to heal, time to grow, time to finally be herself. And as the sky turned from soft pink to brilliant gold, she realized she had won. Not in the way her parents would ever acknowledge. Not in a way that required their approval. But in the way that mattered most. She had taken back her life. And she was never giving it up again.